My family, my father and mother, my father's job got transferred to Texas from Tennessee, and they came down here looking for a house, and the first thing they did when they got to Dallas was to find out what they thought were good schools, and they decided they wanted to move into Highland Park School District. So I ended up moving in on Southwestern, and that's where Higher Elementary School was being built at that time. And so I started off in University Park School for elementary school for 2 years, and then in January of 1949, we all walked over, that is the students, the teachers, the staff, walked from University Park on a very cool January morning all the way over to Higher, and that's when I began my connection to the school district. My dad, neither one had college degrees. My mother had gone some to college and my father had gone to college, but they were both in the Depression, so they had to drop out of the school, so neither one had degrees. And they were determined to make sure that their 4 children had degrees. And so they were saw the great value and importance of getting a good education. So that's how they got started. My father was a marketing of men's clothing, and he had to travel the state, so he was gone a lot. And my mother took on a lot of roles that she was both a mom and a dad at times. But anyway, those were great days. I had my brothers and 2 brothers and my sister, and I had a ball. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And we learned how to fit in. People accepted you, and I got a great education. I remember the teachers the most, and they were, when I look back at it, they inspired us to work hard. They built in us a strong work ethic, and I think we also learned a lot about character building and values, and that was very important to us. And then also you felt like you were part of a special objective of having great schools, and you wouldn't need to be part of making them good schools. I would say that the parents are very supportive, and so school doesn't stop at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It continues on afterwards, and if you haven't done your homework, you're going to hear about it. And so I think that just pushes us without pushing them too much. They didn't push me too much, and you have to be really careful, because I've seen this in some studies back when I was on the school board, that you don't want to burn anybody out too early of education. So, but we've got a good balance, enough rigor, but by the same token, you need to make learning fun, and that's important in our district. At that time, 1946, 47, 48, 49, whatever, at that time, all the streets in University Park had been mapped out and paved and put in place. There were 3 streets left to be done, and that was Centenary, Wentwood, and Villanova, and that was raw grass, basically, just plain acreage. And they, after post-war World War II, needless to say, the growth of families was accelerating, and so they needed to finish that out, get Higher Elementary built and completed, and get that 4th elementary so they could handle all the growth of student enrollment, and they were able to do that. Well, there was just the matter of raw land being out here. There was still, even I can remember being in the 5th and 6th grade, and there were still empty lots, but all the streets had at least some houses on them, and they were filling them up as fast as they could build them. And so that was just part of the natural growth that took place in this northern part of the school district. The 4 elementary schools that were built back in those days were built for about 250 students. And of course, at that time, there was no kindergarten in the elementary schools. And so things were going to happen later that would cause the elementary school to receive an additional grade. And then at the same time, move 2 of them out to the new middle school we built back in the early 1990s. And so this was a really transition period, because there were just no homes. In fact, there's a photograph taken from a plane in about 1936 when the high school opened, the new high school opened, and it's looking north, and there are very few houses north of Northwest Highway, excuse me, north of Lover's Lane. And it was all raw land. There's no question, enter to learn, go forth to serve. And, you know, it's above the doors of the opening doors of the high school. But since then, we now have, I think, have all of our buildings, all of our school buildings. And that's so important. We entered to learn, that's our purpose. But we know that our purpose ultimately is to be of service to other people. I think we emphasize that. I think people grasp that. And I know we were one of the first public schools in Texas, if not the first, to have service hours. And that came back in the 1980s, way back before it really got to be a major thing across Texas. But that's helped kids to understand, and since we live in a very nice neighborhood, that we need to not ever take for granted. And we've always emphasized that service does not end at the borders of the Park Cities. It goes beyond the borders. And so we've always looked for those opportunities where our students can touch and feel and see an opportunity where they can make a difference in the lives of other people, especially other children of their age. I've always known, enter to learn, go forth to serve, because you would enter the high school through the front doors. You see it every chiseled in stone right above the doors. So you knew that, and they talked about it, and that was important. That was an important fact that existed. However, I'm sure I saw it, but until I got on the school board, it never registered with me that there is another saying that's inscribed on the high school building, and that's above the auditorium, above the curtains. There's engraved, the spirit of a people is known by the education of its youth. The point of that is that you can tell what a group is like, what the culture is like, what the people value, if you look at the education. Because if they really invest in the future by educating their children, it tells you where their spirit is. They're looking to the future, and that's their spirit, is they're looking to build the next generation and making sure that we do it right. And so that's always been a very important thing for the school district, that we just don't walk away. We go work hard to make education better. Back in maybe 15 years ago, when I was thinking I was getting ready to receive an award, and I spoke about this in education, and I said, so I picked the phone up and I called people in the district, and I said, tell me, where did we come up with the spirit of a people is known by the education of its youth? And they spent a week or two, and I had already looked myself. They found nothing. They could find nothing that says it. Now, interestingly, I just did it again this last 2 weeks. I went and looked it up. Interestingly, Brigham Young now has it. Okay. Now, I don't know where they got it. They could have got it from us, but we didn't get it. So I asked where did they get it. They said, we do not know. So I'm always going back and thinking about the founders of the district in 1914, and then they built the new high school in 1922, the first one, 1922. And somewhere in order to engrave that, they had to have found that saying, or they had to invent it. And it's always been an interest to me, is did somebody in the district, Dr. Ben Wiseman, who was with us for 35 years as principal of the high school, fabulous educator. And so it's always been interesting that may be attributed to us some way in the long term. Well, Jack, a longtime friend of mine, went to high school with me and known each other a long time. And he was on the school board back in the 80s, and he got off in the early 90s, right after I got on. And I always told him, I said, hey, Jack, I'm busy, but if you ever have a project that has a limited start date and end date that matches up with my legal practice, I would like to help out the district. And so I said that to him, and he took me up on it, because he calls me in 1988, I believe, And there is a very controversial subject in the middle school about whether Highland Park should add ability grouping, and there was pros and cons to it. And so he called me up and asked me if I would chair a committee to get a close look at this, objective look. And I asked him, I said, if you have an answer that I'm supposed to come back with, I cannot do it. But if you tell me I can go about it and we can do it objectively, yes. And he said, absolutely. The superintendent said, absolutely. Whatever the answer is, we'll accept it. So that's what we did, and we had a committee that worked very hard for 4 or 5 months, and we came back with a solution. And the original vote, I asked him, I said, on the first day, what would the vote have been? It would have been 3 against and 10 for. And the way they were trying to get it undone, those. And we put on the committee people who were both sides. Me, I was not in the middle of it, so I didn't see that. But anyway, long story made short, they flipped it, and it was 13-0 to undo it and redo it a different way, and that's what we did. Well, we've had 3 big challenges. First of all, we only had 4 superintendents at Highland Park, which means their average tenure was over 20 years, okay, when I got on the board. And the night actually I was sworn in and went on the board of Highland Park, the existing superintendent at that time announced he was retiring. He was getting up towards mid-60s, something like that. And so he retired. Well, that immediately meant we had to hire somebody. And that was a big challenge for us, to get somebody who could take the school district to a higher level of excellence. And so we made that board of trustees was very dedicated to finding somebody who could really make a difference, positive difference. So we did, which I don't think they'd ever done before, a national search. And we ended up hiring Dr. John Conley from Chappaqua in New York. And Chappaqua and Scarsdale are generally recognized as the 2 best school districts in New York, and we got him to move here, and that was a very important one. So that was a tough challenge. And the next challenge was when I was on the school board and just gotten on maybe 2 years, 3 years, I had been elected president of the school board, and some parents over in the higher school district called me up and said, PTA president, and said, hey, we got a growth problem. We're out of room at higher. And so we noticed University Park was having growth, and other elementaries are having growth, but particularly in the northern sector. And so the question that I asked Dr. Conley, we got an issue, is this real growth, and do we need to start thinking about expanding, because we're out of room in all the buildings, elementary level. And so the question was, is it the pig going through the python, or is this real lasting growth? And so he did some time and came back about a month later. He says, I'll tell you, I've done enough looking that I think this is not a pig through the python. I think this could be real. So we then started from there trying to manage growth. Now, starting from the district opening in the, founded in 1914, and going up, needless to say, you were a tiny little one-building schoolhouse, so to speak. But it had grown, and it was continuing to grow. And so we really had to be really wise and good about it. So he said, let's go by who I understand to be the best suburban suburban demographers in the country, out of Bethesda, Maryland. And they came down and spent a lot of time and did a great study, and came back and told us, we don't go any further than 10 years out. He says, you all have 4,005 students, something like that, low 4,000s. And the most we'd ever have was getting close to 5,000, but we were at 4,004 or 5 or something like that. And they said, we think by and this is 1991, by the year 2010, or close to that, somewhere in there, you're going to be at least 7,000. So that would be from 4 to 7, more than doubling. Now, nobody in the district believed him. People were going crazy when we said we're looking at building out more for this much more, because we never had that many, and we were built out house-wise. The demographer, when the demographer came through the night to present the deal, to present what he had found to the school board, he said, I want to tell you before I start this, there's one thing that shocked me that I've never seen before, and there's one thing that's going to shock you when I tell you. And we said, all right, well, tell us what's going to shock us. He said, well, the shocking is going to be you're going to grow at least 7,000 kids, and we can't tell you it's not going higher than that. Okay, so that was the first thing they said. And then he said, and I said, well, what's the thing that shocked you? He says, what shocked us is we did a personal mailer and questionnaire, and very reliable statistically. And he said, we asked one question on this deal, which is about 25 questions. One of them was, does any of the adults who live in this house graduates of Highland Park, attend Highland Park schools? And the answer was 42%. He says, I want to tell you, if you told me it was 10%, I'd have said you're lying. He said, no, it was 4 times that. He says, there's not, I don't know any other place that's like that in the country. So he said, what you all is you have built-in demand that comes from your prior graduates who come back. Well, first of all, land has been a problem. We had no land to expand on, and we know it's built out, and so our problem was first to figure out the land. Now, what we did was, in the building a new middle school, which relieved the pressure in the elementaries, because we pulled the 5, 6 out. Okay, so that gave us more room, and the cafeterias were built for not many kids. Back in the 20s, 30s, we had to build a new add on the cafeterias. We had just a ripple effect of lots of things we had to worry about. Our gymnasiums, we couldn't hold the number of kids we had, so just those examples. But we tried to make sure that we spent the money wisely. So we looked at building a new elementary school, and we just didn't see how that was going to work, because we had growth coming up through the middle school, and we were going to be building a new building and have to build right on top of it another building. So we said, we're going to put that off. So let's just take the 5, 6 out, build a new middle school, or to get rid of the junior high, add a new middle school, recognizing that as the people told us, the old middle school that we tore down, it was built originally in 1922, it was the high school originally. It had been added on to 14 or 15 times. And he says, I'm going to tell you, you're not going to like what you're going to have to do long term to keep that thing going. So the smartest use of the money using money wisely, would be to build a new elementary. So we did that. In doing that, though, we went and bought the 2 blocks north of us, which would be Granada and the other street that was in there too. So we bought 38 homes. 38 are duplexes. Most of it was single-family dwellings. We bought those, and that gave us enough land that we said we'd have more flexibility now on the south end of the middle school deal for play fields, and also for expansion if we need more expansion. So that was the original question. Now the other thing we were looking at lots where we could buy, and so we actually looked at the Northway Christian Church, where the current Boone Elementary is, and back then they were not interested in selling. But a lot of prayer and a lot of other things, and sure enough, not many years later, we got another growth spurt, and the pig is still going through the python. And so we were able to, Northway Christian was very gracious in helping us and solve our problems, and being able to sell us that piece of property. It made a huge difference for the school district and for the families we have. SMU was given all that land, tons of land, from 3 or 4 or 5 families. Okay, particularly in the area you're talking about north, would be the Caruth family. Okay, and if I remember correctly, the Caruths gave us every other lot north of Lovers, every other lot from Central over to probably Preston Road. Okay, something like that, and they. that was critical long term. But what happened during the Depression, SMU had been given that, but they started selling off the lots in order to be able to survive economically because of the depression. And that was back in the 20s, okay? And so that was tough. That was tough times, and for SMU or anybody like that. And so we have worked many great relationship with the University Park, also a great relationship with the town of Highland Park. And we've worked together. We've certainly in certain events, we've shared space. We've cooperated in opening our buildings to them when they need extra space and vice versa. And so it's all been very good. And of course, we have a lot of programs academic programs and sporting programs that work in our work. And then we have, to our communities, take the Tate Lecture Series. We have lots of programs that our community goes to that are learning educational programs. And of course, in 1990, we began doing programs for fee basis to anybody that was by our professors and others at SMU. So we've had a great working relationship with the university. And of course, you look at University Park, all the streets, literally almost all of them, there's only a few exceptions, are named after a university. Villanova, University right here. You got there's only a few that are not without a tie. So the emphasis has always been we value education. Our community does, and we have it at the national level in universities, and we have it at the elementary school level. Well, the second biggest challenge after getting Dr. Connolly, and then after starting to deal with and planning on how you were going to handle all the growth, the third challenge was, on top of all that, was to handle the Robin Hood situation. And I devoted a lot of time, being a lawyer, I devoted a lot of time. I went to Austin a lot. I got to know the governor, lieutenant governors, the Speaker of the House, and I did a lot of things. I just went down there on my own time and worked hard to figure it out. And what basically the problem was is that the state of Texas had never addressed equity in school funding, where poor or low wealth districts were not having the same access to money to fund the quality of education of a regular old school district, not a high wealth district like us. And so it was patently unfair. And as I've told people before, if I had lived in that district and saw what was going on, I would have filed more suits than you could imagine, because it was patently unfair to the low wealth districts. And so we worked on that and did a lot of things, and we were very fortunate. But what it did, the amazing thing, and this amazing thing about how our community responded, we're getting Robin Hood poured on us in 1992. In 1991, right before that, we figured out that we've got a real growth problem, and we're going to have to build a big new middle school that will have the 5-6 and the 7-8. So we took the 5th and 6th grades out of the elementary, which was very controversial. But we saw if we put it in the middle, and then we put the 7-8, which would mean take that back down from the old junior high level, and that we got in the middle of sort of an accordion 5-6 that would be more like an elementary school, and a 7-8, which would be a little bit more advanced and pushing people like they were in high school. And so those were very critical issues in us being able to deal with it. We got it through, but here's the kicker. As soon as we announced the start of building the building, or about the time we were starting to announce and start a bond issue, the effect of Robin Hood was basically we were shown by Austin what they were going to be doing it. Well, that every house in the Park Cities, their taxes, if you were a taxpayer, doubled. It was 100% increase in 1 year. So if your house was being taxed at, say $10,000, you got a tax bill for $20,000 the next year. And so that's like throwing ice water in your face and ice cubes and everything else. And by golly, it was hard to get the vote, but we won the election on the bond, notwithstanding the fact that they were going to have to pay way more taxes than they'd ever paid before. And so he won the vote by 60% to 40%, 64 and 40 against. And that says a lot about our community, that they're committed to maintaining a quality education. And let me also say, in the Robin Hood plan situation, we always went to Austin and with the legislature because we recognized the inequities, and it was unfair. That it's, let me give you an example. Wilmer Hutchins, same size school district that we had in 1986, okay? I remember my dates right. They had about the same number of students. We spent about 4,000 a student back then. They probably spent maybe 3,000. That's a huge difference. That's a huge difference. 25% more per student. And we had all these special programs, advanced programs. We gave all this additional stuff. Well, they couldn't do it because they didn't have access to the property wealth to be able to do it, because all school districts were basically funded largely out of the property wealth of that district. Well, our property wealth was worth in the billions, and theirs was probably not even close to $500 million. And so we made it very clear to the poor districts that we talked about it in the community, because I gave a lot of speeches along with a lot of other board members and administrators, that our number one goal is to make sure the poor districts are adequately funded, because if they're not, we're going to suffer. And we have got to worry about them, and we have the ability, because of our influence and our power that we do have, whatever, that we have more power in Austin than they have. So they need our help, and we need to make sure we make sure that they are taken care of. Otherwise, we're just foolishness in missing the boat on taking care of what really needs to be first done for the state. And by the way, in Austin, I often have done this. I'll ask a legislator, I'll say, how much money do you think Highland Park is given? How many dollars have we written checks for to Austin for Robin Hood? And the answer is $2 billion. These 9,000 homeowners have written $2 billion on top of our regular taxes. And I always tell them, I'm not complaining about that. I'm just fortunate that we have that, and we're able to have it. But I always told them, I said, if you mess with our schools and try to dumb down our schools, now that's something, and that's when we come out swinging. We're down here to fight for the poor districts to make sure they get their fair share. But if you're not doing that, then that's a problem. And then if you try to take us down, that's a double problem. And so we've always got to make sure that all public schools lock arms when it comes to asking the legislature for money. Now, let's face it, no legislator likes to raise taxes, right? I mean, that's a given. So we have to really stay after them and be reasonable, but not trade away quality education for all kids in Texas. If you think about this, you got a town of Highland Park, you got a city of University Park. The glue that brings these together is the school districts, because they cross both lines, okay? And so we've never had any infight against those two, and it's made all the difference. Because when the parents are committed and involved, it makes a difference. Now, somebody asked me one question one day. Somebody asked me to come down to Houston to a school district down there to speak about school education and being board members and other stuff. And somebody asked me, well, what's the best thing going for Highland Park? And I said, well, the best thing, or the greatest thing for Highland Park, and the greatest positive. And I said, well, because we have strong parent involvement, just because it fits our cultural deal, our level of income, et cetera. So we have a lot of support. And the person said, and what about what's the biggest negative? He says, I said, the biggest negative are our parents, because they're all involved too much in our schools from time to time. So it's good and bad. Yeah. One thing that most people don't realize, you know what percentage of the homes in in this area have children in them, school-age children? 1/3. Only 30% of the homes have children. Most of the homes, 60 some odd percent, do not have children. And so the hard thing is, how do you get them to vote for building new schools in all the other? It's because of the values the people have, okay? And they're not selfish, okay? I would say there's another factor in here in this, is there's a value factor. And you can go to the synagogue, up on the corner there, the churches, etc., that brings a spiritual quality, you know what I mean, from different sources that's very important to our community, okay? And I've always wanted to have somebody do this study, is how many dollars that 75225 and 75205 give in charitable giving every year in this area. It's huge. Okay, now by the way, it's because they've been blessed with financial result. But the other side of that is if they've also taken it and used it for good purposes. Anybody can second guess and say they ought to be doing more, but certainly that has been something that they have not neglected. And it's a lot of things can happen in this community, because if you come up with an idea and it'll do well for other people, doesn't make any difference where those people live, you can get people to get behind you. Raising money here is not an unfun thing to do. It's a fun thing to do because it makes a difference. When I went on the school board, I thought the most important teachers had to be AP Chemistry, AP Physics, AP, going down the list, okay? AP this, AP that. And then when I got about the 5th year of being on the board, I realized, no, the most important teachers are your kindergarten teacher and your 1st grade teachers, because they turn on kids to love learning and enjoy it. They'll become avid readers. They've got thirst for knowledge. Knowledge is fun, okay? And those K1 teachers, they are so invaluable. It's mind-boggling. Now, of course, after you get it, the DNA, and that's our DNA, okay? I mean, I'd say nobody ever told anybody that I was around that we couldn't be president of the United States, okay, for example. And no one, they tell you the biggest dreams you can dream, and go do them. And so it's this unusual thing that people some way have inbred in them, dare to be great. And I don't mean dare to be rich, dare to be great at what you do. And I think we enter and go forth to serve. We go forth to serve with a large purpose for good. I think that's very important to our community. When you talk about traditions in the Highland Park, and that can be Highland Park School District, or it could be the Park Cities, both cities together. But we have a lot of things that are built on tradition, and we've tried to hang on to them as best you can. With obviously things change in this world, we have to change. But we have a great organization that is the Historic League, known as for a long, long time, who have worked hard to do this and to keep people aware of the importance of us preserving a lot of the past. I know when we got ready to tear down some of our buildings and build the new buildings, we kept features from the old buildings, just to make sure that it was a reminder that when you entered, that this was a continuation of something that somebody had a dream in 1914 and has come all the way through. We've been over 100 years. And what all these things go forth to learn, are the knowledge. I mean, the spirit of the people is known by the education of their youth. All of that is built on the fact that people really take seriously the importance of maintaining what we've liked in the past, what's worked for us. And one thing that's worked in the district well, is that the Historic League has done a great job, is the importance and the value of the education systems that we have here. And if we keep that and continue to recognize its value to us as a community, it makes the community stronger, and it causes more people to come here and who want to live a life where they can have a great place to live and where they can raise families and where the traditions and values that they adhere to and love and embrace continue. And our community has done that.